All right, good afternoon, everyone. Hello. Welcome to our webinar on remote work. So this is part of a series of webinars that we periodically host at Provide that are designed to give supporters, colleagues, an in-depth look at our work at Provide. And with this webinar, we're really excited to talk with you about what has been for us a really key organizational strategy for moving the challenging issue of abortion in some hard to reach places, and that's remote work, or work that takes place across a distance outside of a traditional office-based setting. Before we dive in, I want to pause and say thank you, especially to our supporters on the call, past, present, and future. We do believe that good organizational practices, good management, are critical to making the change that we seek in the world, and your support makes it possible, so thank you for that. I am Melanie Zurek. I'm the Executive Director of Provide, and while I'm one of the few office-based staff here in Cambridge, I also work in a lot of different settings as part of my work-related travel, and also as I try and keep up with my family. And so this is a picture of me working remotely from our family's camp in northeastern Maine. I'm going to start us off just by saying a little bit about what you can expect from today's call and today's webinar and what we'll be covering. So again, we're talking about remote work, or work that takes place across a distance outside of an office-based setting. And we'll share a little bit about why remote work has been important to us and the value that remote work has added to our work on the ground and from a management and organizational perspective. We also hope that this webinar will serve a practical purpose, and especially for those of you working remotely, managing remote staff, or considering remote work. So we're going to share some of the tools that we've used that have been most valuable to us, some of the structures that we've put in place, not all of which are designed specifically for remote work, but that have been specifically helpful to us in a remote work context. And then finally, building an effective remote work environment really has been a work in progress for us and continues to be. We're always learning about what works and what doesn't, and new challenges pop up. And so we'd love to hear from you as well, and what's worked for all of you who are working remotely, and certainly take some time to answer questions. We do ask that you save questions to the end. You can go ahead and put them in the chat ahead of time, but we'll be addressing them all at once after we finish the more presentation part of the webinar. So Provide has, just as a little bit of background and context, we've always had field and state-based staff as part of our team. And you'll be able to see on the next slide the states, the 7 states where we're currently working. Our state-based teams have really been a critical part of our organization's capacity to bring local knowledge and relationships to the work, and also to provide a steady ongoing presence in the states where we work that is really necessary to achieve the long-term change that we're trying to achieve. As our state-based teams grew, we began to hire other positions outside of the office. And that was really driven by the fact that we simply wanted to get the best people for the job, and the best people weren't always in Boston or able to relocate. And so over time, as fewer and fewer of us became office-based, we gradually began to recognize and treat all of our staff as remote workers, really seeing the distance that we worked from one another more than whether or not any of us were in the office as sort of the defining feature of remote work. And with less than 15% of our current workforce here in the Cambridge office, we really do consider ourselves to be a remote work organization. And you'd find, even if you came to the office, that those of us who are here come and go frequently and often end up Skype chatting each other more than we spend time talking face to face. We made this transition for the reasons I've already described, right? That we wanted to have the right people in the right place. We wanted to have state-based teams and the people that we needed to get the work done. But we also have seen other benefits come as a result of remote work and the practice of remote work in the organization. And these are both a couple of the things that we've observed about remote work, but we also have we do an annual employee climate survey where we ask the folks who work with us how things are going. And we did a series of focus groups last summer with our remote workforce, specifically about remote work and the structures and experience of remote work. And some of the benefits that were identified through all of these different processes, one is increased trust. that there's just a different kind of relationship that comes when you don't see someone every day. You can't sort of see them at their desk working, and the trust that has come out of getting used to working in that kind of way has been a real benefit for the organization. Certainly greater flexibility, better work-life balance have come out of the remote work practices that we've put in place as well. And then finally, and you'll hear more about all of these things from the staff that are presenting on today's call, but it also has moved us to a more results versus process-oriented mode of planning and given us some efficiency in that area. So as I said, you'll have a chance to hear about some of the specific benefits of remote work as experienced by our field-based staff and by management, as well as about some of the structures and tools that have been specifically useful to them in their work and in supporting their work. So I'm going to turn it over to them, and then I'll come back to wrap up our presentation and turn it over for questions and answers. So I'd like to introduce Bree Pearsall, who's our Kentucky State Coordinator, and who will talk a little bit about what's the experience of remote work has been like from her as a field-based staff.
All right. Thanks, Melanie. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bree Pearsall, and I am the Kentucky Field Coordinator. And I've been with Provide for about 3 years, and in my current role, I help to coordinate a local team of 4 people as we implement our abortion referrals work here in our state. So I'm joining you today from my office on my home in Crestwood, Kentucky, which is right outside of Louisville. And I'm going to share with you some of the value that I find in remote work and also some of the tools that have shaped the way that I work as a remote employee. So the value of being able to be physically present locally is central to our success in influencing local systems. So being a remote worker actually allows me to be more flexible and nimble as I do my work here in Kentucky. We work a lot with folks that we call champions. And champions are people who are working in their own systems to make improvements for women who are seeking abortion care. So I'm easily able to pick up and go meet our champions at their places of work and influence. And in our work with social service providers and healthcare providers, many people are not able to leave for meetings, travel to conferences, or they don't have the capacity to send staff outside of the office for trainings. And so our ability to go to them is what keeps our relationships moving forward oftentimes. I've heard many times from people in far and rural reaches of our state that they're really appreciative that we're able to come to them because they're often left out of conversations or they don't get resources due to distance and geography. So showing up to them really helps us convey that we value them because we do value those relationships with our work. So this picture you have here in the middle is of myself and our Kentucky trainer, Fausto Lucchini, on the road, pulled over on the road, taking a picture with a sign during one of our many travels. So being able to go to our partner sites also helps us to understand their local communities and cultures. So we've been working with a domestic violence program that is actually situated in an old tuberculosis hospital with an incredible architectural history. So it was one of my favorite site tours when we got to really spend some time with them, viewing their facility and talking about all the rehab that they did to this amazing structure to make it a modern day facility for women and their children that are escaping domestic violence. We've also worked with another domestic violence program that's in a rural setting in the state that has a really thriving garden and farm to table program. So when we were able to tour and talk with them about their farm to table and their garden initiative, it helped us more fully understand their philosophy of working with their clients and the reach of the services that they offer. So being able to go to where our champions are and see them in their spaces helps us be in a more authentic relationship with them. So as you know, Provide is a national organization, and having that national connection actually brings a lot of benefit to the work that we do locally as well. So with respect to abortion access, there is limited resources and movement within my state. I can count the organizations on one hand that have any programming related to abortion. So we certainly need to be connected to the energy, the resources, the research, and the experience of others working on this issue in other parts of the country. And we get that through being connected to national networks. So for example, I recently was able to travel to Washington, D.C. to attend and present at the National Conference on Health and Domestic Violence. So being in that space, we were able to pull on some amazing collaborations on a national level that do impact our work here in Kentucky. So let's talk briefly about some structures that we've put in place here within our team. We have a 4-person team in Kentucky, and we now meet in person. We now meet every month, but every other month is an in-person meeting, and the in-between months are via Skype. So we find that our in-person meetings tend to be a little bit more relational and a bit more creative, but our Skype meetings are crucial as well because it allows us a regular and frequent time to all be in the same space, reflecting on our work on a regular basis. We try to, when we do meet in person every other month, and sometimes more often depending on projects that we're working on, we try to be equitable in the distance that we are traveling for those in-person meetings. So even with our local team, we are spread out across the state. So it's important for us that we're not always asking the same people to travel to urban centers for meetings, but that we are looking at where is our team located geographically and that we're able to travel so that folks are sharing that travel time when we're meeting up in person. I think this is particularly important when incorporating people on local teams that live in rural areas who are often asked to travel. So relating back to the structures, working with a job coach has been a big resource for me and how I've come to work as a remote worker. So in the 3 years that I've been working with Provide, I've on 2 different occasions worked with a job coach, and that was supported by Provide. And it was a job coach that was outside of the Provide, outside of the organization. So mostly my focus with the job coach has been identifying tools for structuring my days and weeks, since I found that remote work doesn't have many of the same social cues and daily structure that many of us may have come to rely on in more office-based work settings. So for example, in a remote setting, I don't have the opening daily ritual of pulling into an office parking lot, unlocking an office door, or chatting with my office mate. So I've had to learn to create new rituals for entering into my workspace mentally. And I've also had to learn when my most creative times are as a worker and how to structure my days so that the times when I'm feeling really alert and creative, which is often in late morning for me, are used to do some of the more critical thinking-based tasks. And then times which are lower energy, which for me is often the after lunch slump, I use those times for less critical thinking, like tasks like responding to emails. So one of my favorite tools that a coach helps me identify is having a standing self-planning time, which for me is typically on Monday afternoon. And I use that time on Monday afternoons to intentionally look at the needs of my week and organize my days. And I try to plan my time and fill in the schedule for the rest of the week. And I try to do that planning time away from the distractions of the internet and my computer. So I actually use a lot of handwritten tools. I use a hand-carried calendar as well as a spiral notebook that are my primary work organization tools. And of course, with remote work, I use a lot of electronic tools to help facilitate my relationship with my coworkers and my colleagues. And because I use those electronic tools so often, I really appreciate that I also have some handheld tools so that I can step away from my computer and have that time to be productive as well. And also with our travel schedule here locally, I enjoy having non-computer based tools that I can easily take on the road with me. And then lastly, one of the biggest shifts for me mentally moving out of office-based work is the relationship to breaks. There are breaks that are naturally built into an office-based culture. There's chats over the water cooler or with our office mate or walks around the block. So we have to, as remote workers, I think we have to allow and feel really good about our breaks as well. So I actually schedule in some breaks on my weekly planning time and things that I enjoy doing or that I need to do, things like checking on my sheep, which I have a picture of here with my sheep herd here on my farm. or walking my dog. And so I do build those breaks into my weekly schedule, which has been just a wonderful way to look at that work and life balance, and also to keep my energy level up throughout the day. So now I'm going to pass it on to Wyndi Anderson to talk a little bit about the management perspective. Wyndi's our Senior Director of Programs, and she's been a big advocate for me as a worker in finding my way and coming into my own as a remote worker. So it's all you, Wyndi.
Great. Thanks, Bree. And I just love that picture. I don't know what that says about. I don't know if that's like your break time with me goofing off with you or what. But anyway, hi everybody. My name is Wyndi Anderson, and I am the Senior Director of Programs here at Provide, overseeing the Programs Division. And our biggest program, which Bree works in, is our referrals work. And I have been working remotely since 1998 when I moved to South Carolina to do work on issues around pregnant and parenting drug-using women. And so I worked as an organizer and as a trainer for many years remotely, and I've been working remotely as a manager for Provide since 2010, and that's been a very different thing to manage remotely. It's and it has. I'm no longer thinking about getting my own work done. I am thinking about leading a team and supporting other people to make sure that they have what they need to be able to get their work done. You know, I heard a great comparison one time about what it means to transition from being an organizer or a trainer or just a worker to becoming a manager. And it said, it's a sports analogy, but it's it's like it's a sports analogy, but it reminded me that you're always trying to get the answer right when it's just about you, right? Like, you want to be the one that gets the answer right. You want to know, you want to raise your hand, you want to make sure that the boss sees you. And when you become a manager, you're thinking that your team needs to know the answers. If the only person that knows the answer on the team is the manager, then something is really wrong. If the boss always has to ask the manager for the answers, something is really up, and that's a whole different way of shifting it. It's like the coach on the sports teams. The coach isn't the one who plays all the game. So that was a big shift for me, and not looking at management as it's not a promotion, it's a job. And I was not born a manager. I've had to work really hard at it, as have my managers and have my coaches. So I want to talk a little bit about structures that help remote work and help manage that work and have helped me greatly. And they're simple things: regularly scheduled video meetings, not just phone meetings, but meetings where you can see each other. Ideally, it would be great if we could all be on the video screen at once. Technology will catch up to that eventually. Right now, we kind of do a one-off. Kind of like we are right now, but thinking about regular scheduled non-negotiable meetings every week, and with team meetings we have every other week. This really offers structure, when you're going to be able to touch base, so you can, if it's something that you can hold and you want to share with the whole team or share with the whole organization, you have a place that you can do that. Everything doesn't have to rely on email. Everything doesn't have to rely on texting, or you have a place where you're going to be able to see people's faces. You have a little bit more of a human touchstone there, and it gives people a steady framework to know what to expect from the week. It gives kind of a flow to your week and what to plan around, and the human brain just likes that. It really does. And even if you don't offer it as a manager or as an organization, people will build that structure themselves. Before I had it offered to me, I would build in my own kind of non-negotiable structured things. So it really is helpful for grounding. The one-on-one check-ins over Skype, one of the things that that can be hard about remote work is that you don't always know what's going on with people, and you don't have those bumping into each other in the halls or seeing each other in meetings on a daily basis. And so doing check-ins to make sure that the work is moving along, and that people are moving along, right? That they are growing the way they want to, that they are experiencing work and doing the work, or if they've had a hard day, a hard week, a hard month, that and if it's impacting them, that you're able to see that. And then I'll just say that as a manager, also, if you don't have everything that the worker needs, trying to really get that have that conversation and figure out what they need and how to get it to them. And that usually comes out more in one-on-ones than it is going to come out in team meetings or staff calls. So those one-on-ones will vary, the frequency of them depending on individuals, but they really are quite important. And then outcome-based work plans, really being, so this is not being concerned with the process of how things get done so much, but it allows for the end results. And that really requires good communication and feedback loops to make sure not only that there's been that you've expressed it and said what you want, but that people are hearing what you said, so that, and then as the work begins to move, that you do in those check-ins, hey, how's it going? And if things start to go off the path, that you either re-communicate it, that you go, whoa, wow, that's not what I wanted, it's not heading towards that goal, or that when you get to the end of the goal, if it's in the wrong place, you can either, adjust the plan or you adjust the path and start over again. But having really clear, strong work plans that let people know where they're supposed to end up, and good communication throughout that process is really key. And a couple of tools that have helped me with remote work, because I wasn't born a manager, and I am someone who is there's a term, it's like an autodidact, I think it is, somebody who's like a self-learner and constantly learning. So I get up every morning and walk, and I wake up really early, I don't even want to know, but so I get up in the mornings and I walk and I listen to usually 1 or 2 podcasts. So managertools.com is one of the podcasts that I listen to, and these are 2 guys, and it is from the private sector. They really have a lot of good things about management, and they have things on there both for managers and for what they call directs for workers. And I really just want to encourage you, if you're interested in management at all, there's things in there about hiring, there's things in there about interviewing. This has really been helpful for me. It isn't specific to remote work, but it has been, they do talk about remote work in there, and it's been really, really helpful for me to know what I'm strong at, what I need to work on, and how to be a better manager for the folks that I work with. Remote and Rework by Jason and David here. These books are they're great. They're one or 2 pages long. They really just get to the point of, and they both come out of the tech world industry, which is where a lot of remote work behavior has come from for me anyway. It's where I have learned from, and I would really highly recommend both of those books. The Rework book isn't specific to remote work either. And then open source universities. I use iTunes University a lot. I use Coursera, taking online classes. I mean, from everything from obviously management, but I mean sociology. A lot of the things that have to do with the program content of our work, but that also have to do with how to do Excel spreadsheets, any of those kind of things that I don't know how to do. These are the places that I go. So if you're that kind of learner, and not everyone is, I would highly suggest doing these kind of online learning. The remote work, you don't have to be someone who is geared towards this, but I will say that I naturally gravitate towards this. I like learning alone. I like being able to have the whole world open to me and absorbing things off the internet. So I am a bit of a geek that way, and hope that benefits the people that I work with. And the other thing I want to say, that the biggest tool I've had in thinking about the journey that counts is to keep a sense of humor and to really remember that there's no such thing as failure that isn't productive. And remember that even in the failure and the hardships that you have, that is where you are going to get closer to successes. And that is where I have learned some of my greatest lessons. So I look forward to the questions that you have, and I also work with just a really great team of support from staff and management at Provide. So that really has a lot to do with it as well, because we do take the structures and the supports very seriously. That makes a big difference in thinking about remote work as well. And now we're going to go back to Melanie.
Thanks, Wendy. So yeah, I mean, as Wendy was speaking, one of the things that I was reminded of is just how much intentionality we've had to bring to management practices because of remote work. And so even if some of the practices you're hearing about aren't specific to remote work, it's the absence of the kinds of habits and norms of office-based life that we all kind of were trained in and knew to fall back on. And when we took that office-based setting away, we were sort of without the tools that we had been using previously in our interactions with each other. So we had to pay a lot more attention to all of our management practices, those that were directly about remote work and those that weren't really. And that has, that has been both a big learning curve and also something that, because it did direct us to pay more attention to management, I think has really benefited the organization. So I'm going to talk just about a couple more sort of organizational level structures that we've put into place to support the specific practices that you heard from Bree and Wendy about. And a couple of those are listed here. So Bree spoke to the importance of meeting in person with her Kentucky team on a regular basis. Meeting in person does make a difference, right? There is still no substitute for face-to-face time, and so we make sure that as a whole organization we come together at least once a year. And some of our project-based teams or divisional teams also come together in person periodically throughout the year. We're also experimenting this year with a new structure which we're calling meetups. That's language we borrowed from other remote work organizations. And what that is a pool of travel funds that allows anyone in the organization to make a request to come together in person. That can be across teams, across divisions, but if there's a clearly defined goal and something that they want to achieve that they feel can best be achieved to meet in person, we are fortunate to have been able to dedicate some resources to that so that that really valuable in-person time isn't completely lost from the organization. The lack of that space where you just sort of cross paths in the office, you've heard a little bit about the impact of that. And we did set up, for example, a chat group on Facebook. We used Facebook because it's something that most of our staff are already on. In past years, we've tried to set up intranets and other kind of dedicated systems for communicating informally, but found that it worked best if we used something that people were already using, so that we weren't introducing yet another platform into people's already sort of big desktop or tech plates. And so we use that as a place just to sort of drop things that are of interest to us and chat a little bit about them. And it's been a nice forum for those kinds of informal exchanges that, again, we don't always have time to do when we don't see each other in person. People also use Skype chat a lot just to kind of say good morning or hello and have those informal interactions as well. The last one listed here is that we do reimburse staff who are working out of the office. So most of our staff, we offer money to reimburse them for their mobile device, a good internet connection, which is critical to being able to run video meetings and other technologies. And also make some funds available just to help people set up comfortable and productive offices for themselves in their homes. And then there are a couple others that aren't listed here, but just occurred to me as being worth mentioning in the course of this conversation. One is you heard from a couple folks about outcome-based work plans and outcome-based management. That's really deeply facilitated by the fact that we also integrate evaluation into all of our program work. It's part of our initial program planning. It's conducted throughout the year, and so we have really tight feedback loops. So the data that we're getting from evaluation, our evaluator brings that back to the team so that those outcomes are present not just in the year-end report, but on a routine basis. And then the last thing that I wanted to just mention is that we have started to outline what we see as competencies for remote workers. Not everyone is well suited to remote work. We do make coaching, as Bree mentioned, available to all new employees, specifically to help them transition to remote work. But it's also helpful for us to know, and when we're hiring, what are those competencies? What have we seen helps people in a remote work environment? What have we seen kind of gets in the way of it, so that we're able to screen people and make sure that we've got a good match. And we talk a lot about remote work in the hiring process so that people know what to expect. Because it isn't for everyone, although it has really worked great for our team. So everything that you've heard about today is captured in some way or another on a blog that we set up called Remote Justice. And this was initially developed as an internal tool for us just to start to track and share resources and ideas about remote work. But it certainly wasn't hard to make it available to others who are doing remote work or considering remote work. And so we thought, well, why not share this? Particularly because there aren't a lot of published resources that talk about remote work in the context of nonprofit work or in the context of social justice work. As Wendy suggested, a lot of it does come out of the tech industry, and there's some key differences that we've noticed between what it sounds like to work in a tech environment and what it means to do social justice work, especially around relationships and interaction, and how that factors into the work. And so we thought it might be helpful to just kind of name these resources within the social justice framework and share those with folks. And so you are welcome to go check that out. And just want to note that this was really the work of interns, and thank both Kylie and Christy for developing and maintaining it. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over for questions and answers. And as I said earlier, we'd also really love to hear from anyone on the call who has managed remote workers, who works remotely, and open up a conversation about what works for you, what have the challenges been, and hope that this can be both a sharing and a learning space. So questions, please go ahead and raise your hand, or to go ahead and put that into the chat. And Ashley, our communications officer, is going to help organize that process.
All right, so our first question comes, and it says, can you suggest a way to approach an employer that you're interested in working for about remote work, if it's something that they don't already offer?
Wendy, you are the one on the call who does sort of the most hiring, has the conversation with the most prospective employees. Do you want to offer a response to that question?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would do my homework. So if I were going to approach my, an employer about it, I would do a little bit of homework too. Most work can be done remotely, and then I would ask for a trial run, just like maybe 1 or 2 days a week. And I would also try to figure out what it was that my employer was really interested in. Some people are interested in saving money. Some people are interested in employee happiness, employee retention. Some people, I mean, you really have to figure out what your boss or your management team or the board is really interested in terms of organizationally, and approach it from that angle. Remote work has lots of benefits. And then also understand, for a lot of people who are approached about transitioning from an office environment to a remote work environment, the reason people say no at first, and if people do say no at first, I would say thank you and then go back and ask again in 2 months just to keep asking, because it's about loss of control. It's about a perceived loss of control, not of just I'm losing control of my employees. But if my worth as a boss is that you show up and I can see you, how am I supposed to have my worth as my own worker if you change the rules on me? So it's about giving people time to rethink how they're going to find their own value in work and the environment. You got to give people a little bit of time to rethink that, and it may take a couple of no's before you get a yes.
And I'll add that we've been working remotely as an organization for a number of years now. Like, we've been there, right? It is hard to the kind of control or feeling of control that Wyndi described. That observation comes from our own experience of feeling that loss of control and the anxiety that can bubble up in an organization when you don't see everyone at work and know kind of, you at least feel like you know that they're there and what they're doing. So that is really normal, and can take some time and experience to get comfortable with the change.
Okay, our next question. Are there other organizations in women's health or women's issues besides Provide that offer this type of work on a regular basis?
Yeah, I mean, the audience actually might be the best people to answer that. I mean, some of the organizations that I know of that have a pretty large remote workforce, the National Network of Abortion Funds, I know, has a pretty large remote workforce. I know that IVAS Reproductive Health maintains a couple of different offices in different settings, which is a little bit different and a little bit the same, and also has at least one person who works remotely outside of an office setting. And Sea Change as well, I know, has some remote staff. So, that's just the ones that kind of I'm immediately aware of, but I know that there are lots others. I think Forward Together as well. So my apologies if there's definitely groups that I'm not recognizing in responding to that question, and encourage others, both the presenters on this call or anyone in the audience who are aware of others, to name them as well.
Urge Unite for Reproductive and Gender Equity was written in one of the question fields.
Yes, that's right. Thank you.
Yep. Kristen asks, I would love to hear more about what the competencies are for remote workers.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, and as soon as I said that, I was like, I should have that listed in front of me because someone's going to ask. I'm going to punt this one to Wyndi again because of the role that she plays, the lead role that she plays in hiring.
So, I mean, I would say that so when I'm thinking about hiring, I mean, I think about the ability to what I call manage up, people who can vocalize, and sometimes people are intimidated by hierarchy and they don't know how to tell the boss or tell people who are above them, hey, I need this, or hey, I don't know how to do this, or and then there's other things like, hey, I'm feeling sick, or hey, I'm having a hard time, and just so that if you notice a change, and there's a lot of narration that has to happen that feels like literally you are narrating your life. Hello, Melanie, today I am feeling down, and if you hear that inflection in my tone, then please don't take that personally, or not that it has to be like that blatant. Well, I actually am that blatant, but not everyone has to be that blatant, but so much has to be specifically said in remote work, because you can lose a lot in translation. You don't get to see the body language, you don't get to, things happen very fast. You can just be chatting on Skype. Punctuation can mean things. So people who are really willing to and follow up, and direct communication is really important. People who don't like direct feedback or direct communication, or those kinds of situations, I think could find it unnerving. It could feel cold or harsh, and it's not. It's really not. But it could feel like robotic in terms of having to narrate things, I think sometimes, is what I have heard from people. I mean, Bree, I'd like to hear what you think about this, but it's that's a lot of what I think about, and that there's a way in which too I try to find folks who are going to know how to do what Bree has done in terms of taking care of themselves, moving around enough, having some social time with people for lunch, because I'm here in Silver Spring, Maryland, and it can get, I mean, I can go days if I'm not careful without leaving the house. The only person I will see is my partner if I'm not thoughtful about it. And the people who will pay for that are my coworkers. I will start to snap at them. So you have to be thoughtful. You have to be able to manage yourself pretty well. So that's not a nice succinct list. I bet we could have one.
Yeah, and I'll just add, really kind of going off on what Wyndi was talking about, with managing up is sometimes it can take a while to feel comfortable with your management structure enough to be able to verbalize what you need. But that certainly, I think, is a really important part of feeling grounded in remote work. And then just be working from my home. My personal life is a lot more intertwined with my professional life. And so I think I've had to prioritize being self-reflective as well. So almost, creating the time to look at what is working for me, what's not working for me. And again, just going back to that coaching, I mean, part of why that's been so beneficial is because that is a person that's outside of the provide frame. So they're able to kind of hold that personal, professional space with me, which I've had to pay a lot more attention to as a remote worker.
And I would add to that, just from my observations about doing the work and my own experience, that the outcomes orientation that you've heard us talk about helps too, right? It helps to have people who are like, just tell me where we need to go, I can figure out how to get there. And that orientation, and that's different than an orientation with someone who really looks for kind of guidance every step along the way. And both are productive work styles, but the more outcome orientation and that self-directedness that you've heard Wyndi and Bree talk about makes a big difference has made a big difference in a remote work environment.
All right, our next question comes from Joanna, and it is, it's so interesting to hear your experiences and perspectives. I'd like to know what's the most common misconception about remote work.
I'm going to think on that for a second, but invite Wyndi and Bree also to jump in.
I mean, the most common misconception, when you type in remote work, it always shows people like working from the beach and people like, laying by a lake with a laptop, which I suppose you could do those things, or I think that there's this idea that people are going to be in like these fantastic places, and that can happen, but life goes on as usual, right? Like we are workers, and you just end up doing the work. It's not I feel like that's a common misconception out there, that people are just having these like fabulous lives and you are, but that's just not true, that's just, I don't think so anyway.
And I, of course, totally reinforced that by putting that picture of me working by the lake. But I will add about that I actually don't have an internet connection at the side of the lake in northeastern Maine, and so most of the work that I did when I was up in Maine was at the McDonald's, which had an internet connection, which is nice.
That's right. Thank you for adding that, Melanie, because McDonald's, yes.
Yeah, and I'll just add, I think a lot of times people picture remote work as being completely office-based in a remote setting. And for me, as a social worker before coming to my work with Provide, I was always out in the community, and that's basically what my work is now as well. I still am all over the place talking with people in their spaces, and really the remote part of my work is just that I don't report back to an office, and that I'm more in relationship with colleagues across the country. But I'm still, the day-to-day work for me is still pretty much just being in my community.
I will say too that what happens in remote work that I think that people don't realize is that when I worked in an office, when you go to a conference or when you were out of the office, you kind of got to be away from the office. When you're in remote work, because you're out of the office all the time anyway, if you have an internet connection or a phone, you're expected to be on calls or on the computer if you can do that, right? Like if you're in your hotel room or if there's a connection available, like we want you on the call because we know it can happen anywhere now. If you're in the car, so it's there's a way in which you have to that divide, like Bree was talking about, actually you have to be careful about that because I mean, people take calls in airports, people in ways that I hear a lot of people who work in offices, they don't have to do it when they're traveling. Like we don't get the traveling break, which is fine, but it's just it's because we do remote work.
It is, while working remotely, do you find yourselves overwhelmed with emails from your team members?
I'll offer my response to that question and welcome others too. What was just being talked about, right? That there's this sense of sort of always being available, or the risk of feeling like you always need to be available because you don't have the boundaries of the office or your computer off and on the way you can in more office-based work. There's a real risk of feeling constantly inundated by work. And so both as individuals, I think it's really important as individual remote workers to set those boundaries and say, this is when I shut down, this is when I'm not available, this is when I turn off my email. And as an organization and as an organizational leader, be really mindful of the culture that we set with our own habits. And so that can mean, there are things like if I am on email at midnight or on a Saturday afternoon, that can mean queuing up my emails to be sent out the next day, just so people aren't seeing emails coming from me at really odd hours when I actually don't want other people to feel like they have to be working. And that's, there are some roles and tasks in the organization that do require working at different hours because we do field-based work and we need to be available for when the sites we train are available and things like that. There are times where it really makes sense, and we certainly don't want to tell anyone not to work on a Saturday afternoon if that's what's productive for them. But we also want to be mindful of not setting the expectation that people are always in the office or always on call, because that's not the culture that we're trying to build here. It's not healthy for folks. The other thing that I will say about that question, because it is a second way to answer it, is there are always kind of devices pinging at you because we do rely on so many different technologies, and I get work correspondence by email, Skype, on my phone, both phone and text, and we really leave it to each other to navigate boundaries around that. But there is a certain discipline in like leaving the phone, which as a parent is a little hard to do, but like leaving the phone off or leaving it at home just to get away from the technology, which is a different form of interaction. To have a screen, right, is just sort of a different human experience that for me, I know I need to step away from time to time. Yeah, I'm seeing chats that reinforce just that need to like structure when you're going to interact and how. I mean, that's part of that really open and direct communication that Wendy and Bree were also talking about.
I have learned to give myself permission to be working and also not have internet or email open. So, if I'm working on a presentation or something and emails are coming in, I automatically go to that email. So, absolutely setting boundaries outside of workspace. But for me, in order to end my day feeling like I did anything other than respond to emails, I need to limit the time that I'm actually working on email even within my workday.
All right, I've got two more questions that I think we can get to before we hit 2 o'clock. The first one is, if the senior staff person is exhibiting signs of distrust of the remote worker, how do you suggest working on that?
So Wendy, do you have thoughts on this? You want to take this one?
I just want to make sure I understand the question, or Ashley. So the question is, so a senior staff person is like stressed out and it's coming out on the team.
I read it as they're distrustful of the remote worker because they're not seeing them doing the work because the person's remote.
Oh, right, right. Like there's a, right. Yeah, I mean, I think that, so I think, no, that's like a hard transition period, and I don't know, I would have to know more background. I mean, I'll just like, so I'll just give my general advice, but that would have to be like an open conversation. If it were my manager, I would ask, what is it that you're not seeing? What is it that you think you need to see in order to, to feel like you're caught up on what I'm doing? What indicators do you need, in order to feel like you're getting all the information that you need? I mean, these are a lot of times when managers are transitioning over to remote work, they do want to know more process-oriented stuff. Where are you? What are you doing? How are you doing that? Are you ticking boxes? Do you have a timeline? And they do want to get in the weeds a little more than people, and people feel that, and it feels like micromanaging. It's good to ask the questions so that you can be clear in that transition just what markers you might have to hit for a little while that person still transitions out, and then try to nudge your manager towards what's the end goal. Ask what are we working towards, so that both of you can manage up from the bottom and say, I'm really trying to focus on what the end is here, right? I'm happy to do these process things, but I also want to know what I'm really trying to get towards the end here. That way you can kind of start to move someone towards what the end is, because the hard part is that your process may be very different if it doesn't match with what how the manager works. That can be a tough situation, and yeah.
Yeah, I would echo everything that Wendy has said, and can say from the position of the folks that I manage are senior managers, and like there have been times, right, where people get nervous, there's anxiety, and that can lead to distrust. It can lead to that kind of need to try and seize some control, and either as a supervisor or as someone's report, being willing to say, what are you worried about here? Right? What are you worried is happening? What is it that you're worried about here? What is the bigger concern that you have? And be able to communicate about that can also be really helpful in those circumstances, because that usually there's something, right? There's something about that there's a fund or deadline, there's something happening that person holds responsibility for and is anxious about meeting that responsibility for herself or for himself. So figuring what that is and how to kind of partner together to make sure that thing doesn't happen can kind of break you out of that space where you can feel stuck. Like, why do they keep checking in on me? Why don't they trust me? And it can help break through that. One more question, I think.
Yeah, I think being very proactive on the communication front makes a big difference in helping to ease anxiety on all sides. The last question here is, how is the concept of overtime managed in remote work? Is it logged?
Yeah. So we're all salaried employees, so we don't work hourly. We do, as an organizational practice, and we expect that people work a 40-hour work week. We do have people fill out timesheets, but we don't track or log overtime because we don't have any hourly paid employees. So I wouldn't know how to answer that question for folks who are paid on an hourly basis. If there's anyone in the audience who does work in that structure, I think we have 2 minutes. Please speak up.
We don't work in that structure, but I would imagine that there is software. Lots of companies are now working remotely. There is software they can load on your computer that tracks the time that you sign in, and it ticks away the number of hours that you spend, because they also now have video cameras that will show you sitting at your computer working. So they will tick in the amount of time that you're signed in, sitting there working, which is not at all but I'm just saying there's tracking software for consultants, for lawyers, that also ticks off the amount of time that you're working on things that control that. And then companies are also employing all kinds of really just bizarre tactics to it's not just a great remote work environment, but there are ways that people are dealing with the overtime issue.
Okay, I think we have come to the end of our time. Ashley, were there any last minute quick questions or comments before we say goodbye?
Just thank you for attempting to answer that question.
Yeah, I mean, you know, there are our approach to remote work isn't the only approach to remote work. Certainly, it is informed by the size of the organization, our organizational values, the culture we're trying to build, and the nature of our work. And there's all sorts of other structures in the world out there that are different and that also work. But thank you for taking the time today to talk with us about our approach. I hope it's been useful. It certainly is useful to us to step back and think about it in order to present it to all of you. So my appreciation to you all for being here today, and I hope everyone has a great afternoon wherever you are.